Clint Eastwood is 96 years old, and he's outlived nearly every actor on the list he's about to give you. 5 names. 5 men he's called the finest he ever shared a set with, drawn from a career stretching more than 7 decades and built alongside more collaborators than most directors could count in a lifetime. But what gives this particular list its real weight isn't the ranking itself. Every single one of them is dead. This isn't some breezy retrospective where a legend talks up his favorite co-stars. This is a 96-year-old man quietly drawing a line back through his own history, naming the ghosts who made him better. We're going through them in the order he named them. Number 5 on Eastwood's list is Gene Hackman, specifically for what he brought to the role of Little Bill Daggett in the 1992 Western Unforgiven. Hackman's path to that performance was anything but a straight line. He was born in San Bernardino, California, in 1930, and spent most of his childhood in Danville, Illinois. His father walked out on the family when Gene was still young, a wound that Hackman has spoken about openly over the years, and one he's credited with shaping the restless, coiled intensity that would define so much of his screen work. At 16, he lied about his age to enlist in the Marines. After his discharge, he drifted through one odd job after another, including stints as a warehouse worker and a diesel mechanic. Not exactly the biography of someone headed for Hollywood. He didn't make a serious commitment to acting until his 30s, which made his early struggles that much sharper. At the Pasadena Playhouse, studying alongside a then unknown Dustin Hoffman, Hackman was famously voted least likely to succeed by his own classmates. The story has become something of Hollywood legend at this point, mostly because what followed made the whole thing look so spectacularly foolish in hindsight. His breakthrough came in 1967 with Arthur Penn's Bonnie and Clyde, a film that cracked open American cinema and earned Hackman his first Academy Award nomination. 4 years later, in 1971, he took the role of Popeye Doyle in The French Connection and won his first Oscar, playing a hard-driving, boundary-pushing narcotics detective with a physical ferocity that very few actors of his generation could have matched. It cemented him as one of the defining screen presences of the decade, someone equally convincing as hero, as villain, or as something sitting in the uncomfortable territory between the two. Getting him into Unforgiven 2 decades after that peak took genuine persuasion. Eastwood has talked about it in an American Film Institute interview, explaining that he and Hackman had known each other for years without ever actually working together. When Eastwood first sent him the Unforgiven script, Hackman turned it down without much hesitation. He told Eastwood directly that he was tired of violent pictures. After a career full of them, he simply didn't want to make another one. Eastwood didn't take the rejection as final. He went back to Hackman with a different frame entirely, arguing that Unforgiven wasn't another violent Western in the traditional sense. It was a film built to tear apart the mythology of the Old West gunslinger from the inside out, a story specifically designed to interrogate the cost of violence rather than celebrate it. He was making a statement against the very thing Hackman said he'd grown weary of. That reframing changed the conversation. Hackman signed on, and what he delivered as Little Bill Daggett was something rare, a performance that shifted registers so smoothly the audience barely felt it happening. Charming and almost folksy in one scene, then coldly, casually brutal in the next, he created a character whose menace was scarier precisely because it never felt theatrical. The Academy agreed. Hackman took home his second Oscar, this time for Best Supporting Actor, and added one of the most memorable antagonists in the history of the Western genre to a filmography that had already seen more than its share of landmarks. Eastwood has come back to that performance again and again over the years, and his point is always the same. Hackman could accomplish more with a half smile and a single beat of silence than most actors could with 3 pages of dialogue. It's a rare quality, and Eastwood recognized it immediately. After Unforgiven, Hackman didn't chase another comeback or try to top himself. He quietly stepped away from acting in the early 2000s, trading scripts for novels and painting brushes, and he spent the last 2 decades of his life in a kind of peaceful, deliberate obscurity that almost no one in Hollywood ever manages to pull off. No dramatic announcements, no farewell tours, no interviews about how much he missed the craft. He simply left on his own terms, and that was that. In February of 2025, Hackman was found dead at his home in Santa Fe, New Mexico. His wife, Betsy Arakawa, was discovered alongside him, and the loss hit the industry hard. Eastwood's list, which had felt like a warm tribute just weeks before, suddenly carried a different weight entirely, reading less like a ranking and more like a memorial. Coming in at number 4 is Richard Harris, who played English Bob in Unforgiven. Harris didn't arrive on that set as a blank slate. He walked in carrying decades of legend, controversy, and a career that had burned brilliantly, then cooled, then burned again. He was born in Limerick, Ireland, in 1930, the 4th of 8 children, in a family that ran a flour milling business. His earliest ambition had nothing to do with film or theater. He wanted to play rugby professionally, and by all accounts he had genuine talent for it. But a bout of tuberculosis in his 20s ended that path before it could go anywhere, and Harris found himself redirected toward a stage he hadn't planned on standing on. He trained at the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art, and by the early 1960s, he had carved out a serious reputation as a dramatic actor. His performance in This Sporting Life in 1963 earned him an Academy Award nomination and announced to the world that this was someone worth watching. International fame followed when he took on King Arthur in Camelot, both on stage and on screen. And for a stretch of years, Harris was one of the most recognizable names in cinema. Off-screen, he was living with just as much intensity as any character he played. His drinking was well documented and widely discussed, and he ran in a circle of fellow hellraisers that included Richard Burton and Peter O'Toole. That world was loud, wild, and in many ways genuinely destructive, but it also produced some extraordinary friendships and rivalries that have been written about ever since. By the time Unforgiven came around in 1992, Harris had already put the bottle down and was working to rebuild momentum in a career that had quieted considerably since his 1960s peak. He wasn't desperate, but he was hungry, and that combination of seasoned craft and renewed drive made him exactly the right fit for what Eastwood had in mind. The story of how Harris actually got the part is one Eastwood has told with obvious pleasure for years, including in a well-remembered episode of Inside the Actor's Studio. When Eastwood called Harris's home to offer him the role, the person who answered passed along the name Clint Eastwood to her husband. Harris, at that exact moment, happened to be sitting in front of his television, watching one of Eastwood's own westerns. He was so convinced the call was a prank that he asked his wife to confirm the name not once but twice before he was willing to pick up the phone. Eastwood loved that detail every time he told it, because it captured something honest about how unlikely their pairing must have seemed from the outside. Two old lions from very different corners of the industry, finding common ground on the same dusty frontier. Once Harris committed to the role, he didn't just show up and deliver the lines as written. He pushed. He went to Eastwood with a specific idea that English Bob should be played as an inflated, upper-class fraud, a man whose entire identity is built on the performance of aristocratic dignity. Harris wanted the audience to see that the legend of English Bob is something Bob himself has carefully constructed and constantly maintains. And that's what makes the collapse so devastating. When Hackman's Little Bill knocks him down in a jail cell and begins methodically dismantling the myth in front of the whole town, there's nothing left underneath. The performance was the man, and now even that's been taken away. Eastwood trusted Harris completely with that vision, and the result was one of the film's most quietly devastating moments. The jailhouse confrontation between the two men carries a weight that sneaks up on you, built entirely from restraint and precision rather than any kind of theatrical fireworks. That performance helped set off a genuine late-career resurgence for Harris, one that gathered real momentum fast. The very same year he appeared in Unforgiven, Harris earned another Oscar nomination for The Field, a film that showed the full range of what he could do when given serious material to work with. Then came a role that introduced him to an entirely new generation, one that had never seen a Western and likely had no idea who English Bob was. He stepped into the robes of Albus Dumbledore for the first 2 Harry Potter films, and just like that, millions of children around the world knew his face. Harris died in 2002 following a battle with Hodgkin's lymphoma. By all accounts, he faced the end with the same sharp wit he'd carried through his entire career. He was reportedly being wheeled out of a hotel lobby when he told the paramedics it was the food that got him in the end, a punchline delivered with the same effortless theatrical timing he'd brought to English Bob a decade earlier. His director on Unforgiven lived long enough to witness that entire second act play out, and then to lose him too. Coming in at number 3 is Eli Wallach, who played Tuco in Sergio Leone's 1966 masterpiece, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. In terms of background, Wallach could hardly have come from a place further removed from the dusty plains of the American frontier. He was born in Brooklyn in 1915, the son of Jewish immigrant parents who ran a small candy store in a neighborhood that was otherwise predominantly Italian. From that beginning, Wallach carved a path that ran straight through some of the most serious dramatic training available at the time. He studied at the University of Texas at Austin and then sharpened his craft further at both the Actors Studio and the neighborhood playhouse, placing himself among the earliest and most respected practitioners of method acting working on the New York stage. This was a man who took the craft seriously long before Hollywood came knocking. He won a Tony Award in 1951 for The Rose Tattoo, a recognition that cemented his reputation as one of the stage's genuine heavyweights. By the time Leone reached out about the 3rd chapter of his Dollars trilogy, Wallach already had a strong film career built largely around playing outlaws and dangerous men. His role as the ruthless Calvera in 1960's The Magnificent Seven had already shown audiences exactly how far he could push that type of character without ever tipping into caricature. When Wallach brought Tuco to life on screen, something almost electric happened. His performance was so vivid, so relentlessly watchable, that he very nearly walked away with the entire film, pulling focus even from Eastwood's iconic Man with No Name. Interestingly, Eastwood has never appeared to resent that fact in the slightest, which says something worth noting about both men. Filming alongside Leone in Spain was no safe or comfortable experience. During one sequence, Wallach was dragged across a considerable stretch of ground by a galloping horse, while his hands were bound tightly behind his back. In another, Leone had him positioned so close to a passing train that one of the iron footboards missed his head by only a matter of inches. These weren't controlled studio stunts with safety margins built in. They were genuinely close calls on a production that moved fast and took risks. Wallach absorbed every bit of it and delivered a performance that has never really faded from the cultural conversation. Decades after the film's release, people still whistle Ennio Morricone's iconic theme in his presence, and Wallach once said he could feel it coming before it even started, a testament to just how deeply that role had attached itself to him in the public imagination. He never stopped working after that. His appearance in The Godfather Part 3 as an aging mobster who meets his end through a poisoned cannoli added yet another memorable moment to a career already full of them. What made Wallach's story genuinely unusual, though, was the sheer length of his run. He continued taking film roles well into his 90s, appearing in Wall Street, Money Never Sleeps, and The Ghostwriter, among others. By the time of his death, he stood as one of the last surviving major stars from Hollywood's golden studio era, a living connection to a world that had largely disappeared around him. At the 2010 Governors Awards, Eastwood walked out onto that stage and handed Eli Wallach an honorary Academy Award. 44 years after the two of them had faced off across a sun-scorched Spanish cemetery in Sergio Leone's desert. Wallach, never one to let a moment pass without humor, used his acceptance speech to note that he'd played more bandits, thieves, hired killers, warlords, and mob figures than most actors see in a lifetime of roles. It was a funny line, but it was also an honest one. 6 decades of career, built almost entirely on men who operated outside the law, and yet somehow, Wallach always found the human warmth buried beneath all that corruption. When Wallach passed away in June of 2014 at the age of 98, Eastwood didn't stay quiet. He released a statement describing him as a wonderful guy and a wonderful actor, and went on to mention that the two of them had carried fond memories of the good, the bad, and the ugly all the way through the years. He also pointed out that they hadn't just stayed in touch. They'd actually worked together again decades later on Mystic River, the 2003 crime drama Eastwood directed, where Wallach took on a smaller supporting part. That reunion on set, Eastwood said, had been genuinely great. For two men whose first collaboration involved fake graves and a mountain of Spanish dust, that's a friendship worth noting. Coming in at number 2 is Robert Duvall. For the role he brought to life as Frank Harlan, the cold and calculating land baron at the center of the 1972 Western Joe Kid. To understand how Duvall ended up in that role, you have to go back to where he started. He was born in San Diego in 1931, the son of a Navy rear admiral, and grew up inside a household built around military structure, discipline, and the expectation of quiet authority. That upbringing left a permanent mark on how he carries himself on screen. Whenever Duvall plays a judge, a commanding officer, or any man who expects the room to fall silent when he speaks, there's something in his posture and his stillness that doesn't feel performed. It feels like memory. He arrived in New York to train at the neighborhood playhouse, where he found himself in class alongside a young Dustin Hoffman. The two of them were so broke during those early years that they shared a cramped apartment, splitting whatever costs they could manage while waiting for the industry to notice them. Duvall's first real screen opportunity came in 1962, when Robert Mulligan cast him as Boo Radley in To Kill a Mockingbird. It was a nearly wordless role, a character who existed mostly in the shadows of a story told by children, and yet audiences couldn't shake him. Decades later, people still talk about what Duvall did with almost no dialogue and almost no screen time. That's a very specific kind of talent. By the time he crossed paths with Eastwood a decade later, Duvall had already established himself as one of the most dependable actors directors could call on. He wasn't chasing leading roles at that point. He was the actor you brought in when you needed a supporting part to feel like it had actual weight. Joe Kid wasn't considered one of Eastwood's stronger westerns, either at the time or in the years since. It was a fast, functional picture directed by John Sturges and written by Elmore Leonard, and Eastwood himself has acknowledged that the film seemed to rush toward its ending, almost as if the story ran out of patience with itself before the final act arrived. What Duvall brought to that film, though, was something none of the surrounding weaknesses could undo. Frank Harlan is a man who presents civility to the world, while cruelty runs just beneath the surface. And Duvall played that gap with such ease that critics who dismissed the movie around him still found themselves stopping to describe what he was doing on screen. That specific quality, the restrained threat of a man who doesn't need to raise his voice because everyone already knows what he's capable of, became the defining note of Duvall's work for the next 5 decades. He carried that same controlled menace into Tom Hagen in The Godfather and its sequel, The Family's Quiet Fixer, operating in the shadow of Brando and Pacino without ever disappearing into that shadow. He turned it up to something almost mythological as Lieutenant Colonel Kilgore in Apocalypse Now, the napalm-obsessed officer who loves the smell of victory in the morning and means every word. And then he stripped it all the way back down for Tender Mercies in 1983, playing a broken country singer trying to piece his life together. A performance so bare and honest that it won him the Academy Award for Best Actor. That Oscar came more than a decade after he and Eastwood shared the screen in the New Mexico dust, and it was long overdue by most accounts. What makes Duvall's story particularly striking is that he simply never stopped. He kept showing up in film after film, decade after decade, accumulating 7 Academy Award nominations across a body of work that included Network, The Natural, and the celebrated television miniseries Lonesome Dove. That last one deserves its own conversation. His portrayal of Augustus McCrae in Lonesome Dove is something many critics and viewers consider not just the best thing Duvall ever did, but one of the finest performances in the history of American television. He reportedly felt the same way about it himself, saying it was a role he cherished more than any award he ever received. For a man who collected nominations and acclaimed the way other actors collect credits, that's saying something. Robert Duvall passed away in February 2026 at 95 years old, and the tributes that followed reflected just how deeply he had shaped American cinema. Adam Sandler called him one of the greatest actors who ever lived. Viola Davis said she was in awe of his towering, humane portrayals. Alec Baldwin placed him without a moment's hesitation alongside Brando, De Niro, and Pacino as one of the greatest American screen actors of all time. What made the timing especially striking was that his death fell in the same brutal February that claimed another name on Eastwood's list. 2 of the 5 gone within the same month. A list that was already elegiac in spirit became something closer to a live eulogy, a document of loss that kept updating itself in real time. Number 1 on the list is Lee Marvin, recognized for playing the boisterous, hard-drinking prospector Ben Rumson in the 1969 musical Paint Your Wagon, the only musical Clint Eastwood ever agreed to star in. It's a choice that surprises people, and Eastwood himself has treated the film with a certain wry, self-deprecating distance over the years. Neither he nor Marvin had any real business being on a musical stage, and yet here it sits at the top of his list. Marvin's road to that role was as rough as anything he ever played on screen. He was born in New York City in 1924, into a family with deep colonial American roots, and by his teenage years, he had already been expelled from multiple schools. He enlisted in the Marine Corps during World War II and was wounded during the invasion of Saipan, a wound and a war that friends said never fully left him, even though Marvin himself almost never talked about it. He stumbled into acting almost entirely by chance after the war. He was working as a plumber's assistant when someone asked him to fill in for an ailing actor in a local theater production. That small accident of timing changed everything. Through the 1950s, he built a steady career, playing menacing heavies in films like The Big Heat and The Wild One, the kind of work that gets you recognized but rarely celebrated. The celebration came in 1965 with Cat Ballou, where Marvin played a comedic, scene-stealing, thoroughly drunken gunslinger that nobody saw coming from him. The performance earned him the Academy Award for Best Actor, beating out Richard Burton and Laurence Olivier in the process. That's not a footnote, that's a statement. He outran 2 of the most decorated theatrical actors of the 20th century by playing a man who could barely stand up straight. By the time Paint Your Wagon came along 4 years later, Marvin was reportedly drunk through much of the production. And somehow, that only deepened what he brought to Ben Rumson, a character with a ragged, melancholy charm that the film still hasn't shaken off decades later. There's a moment where Rumson confesses to his younger partner that he gets low every now and then, but figures he'll be fine as long as his friend sticks around. It lands every time, partly because you sense Marvin wasn't entirely performing it. His recording of the film's ballad Wanderin' Star shot to number 1 on the UK charts, which remains one of the more unlikely chart toppers in pop history. A Hollywood tough guy, fresh off an Oscar for playing a different kind of drunk, somehow becoming a recording sensation across the Atlantic. It shouldn't work, and it absolutely does. What makes Marvin's placement at the top of Eastwood's list especially interesting is the ripple effect. Eastwood has credited casting conversations from that era, shaped in part by Marvin's own recommendations, with steering him toward director Don Siegel. That relationship would go on to define the next major chapter of Eastwood's career entirely, producing films like Dirty Harry and Escape from Alcatraz. In a very real sense, Lee Marvin didn't just earn the top spot on a personal list. He helped build the career of the man who made it. Marvin spent his final years largely removed from the Hollywood machine, taking smaller parts here and there but never scrambling after the kind of stardom that had once put him at the very top of the industry. In 1987, he died of a heart attack in Tucson, Arizona, at 63 years old. It was a quiet loss for a business that had always known, even if it rarely said so out loud, that Marvin was a far more serious artist than his bruising screen persona ever suggested. Paint Your Wagons drew mixed notices when it first came out, critics unsure what to make of its gold rush love triangle wrapped inside a musical western. But in Eastwood's own telling, time has done something unexpected to that film. It's grown stranger, warmer, and more emotionally resonant than anyone predicted from a genre picture that occasionally stopped to break into song. That kind of reappraisal says something not just about the movie, but about the people who made it. Taken together, these 5 names reveal more about what Eastwood genuinely looks for in an actor than any polished award ceremony speech ever could. He wasn't building a list of box office giants or industry favorites. He was pointing at something more specific than that, more personal. It was never about who could draw fastest or hold a cold stare longest under a wide-brimmed hat. It was about Hackman's rare ability to make menace feel almost rational, almost understandable. It was Harris's willingness to let a false legend collapse in front of the camera without flinching. It was Wallach finding real humanity buried inside a man who probably didn't deserve any. It was Duvall making quiet cruelty look indistinguishable from good breeding and good manners. And it was Marvin turning a stumbling, half-drunk wreck of a character into someone you genuinely want beside you when everything else fell apart. Every one of them is gone now. 3 of the 5 passed within just the last few years alone, and Eastwood, at 94, remains one of the last people alive who watched all of it unfold firsthand. Camera rolling, dust hanging in the air. The whole extraordinary run of it. A genre he helped shape and then reshape across 7 decades has been slowly emptying out around him, one collaborator at a time, one old friend after another. That's exactly why this list carries a weight that most of Eastwood's other rankings and interviews simply don't. It's not really a countdown of performances. It functions more like a roll call, the kind a veteran gives at a reunion when he looks around the room and realizes he's the last one standing who remembers not just the characters these men played, but who they actually were when the cameras stopped. Eastwood didn't dress this list up in sentiment or controversy. He said plainly who impressed him most, named them in the order they came to him, and let the accumulating silence of their absences carry whatever else needed to be said. There's something almost unbearably moving about a man who spent 60 years on screen playing figures who seemed untouchable by grief, now quietly naming the 5 performances that stayed with him the longest, only to find that by the time he reaches the last name on that list, he's the sole surviving witness to all of it. He's the only one left who can still sit down and tell the story from the beginning. There's a quiet truth hiding inside a list like this one, and it's worth sitting with for a moment. Westerns were never really about guns or glory. They were about endurance, about who could last long enough to still be standing when the dust settled and the noise faded away. That theme wasn't just a storytelling device, it was the whole point. And Clint Eastwood has become that figure in real life now. Not because he outfought anyone, not because he was the fastest or the most decorated, but simply because time kept moving the way it always does, slowly and without mercy, the same way it eventually catches every gunfighter, real or imagined. What's striking is what he's done with that position. He hasn't spent it polishing his own legend or reminding people how far he's come. Instead, He's used some of what little time remains to make sure 5 other names are still being spoken out loud, clearly and with genuine respect, before the window to say them closes entirely. That's not a small thing. In an industry that rarely looks back, that kind of deliberate remembrance matters. It's a choice to say that these people existed, that their work was real, and that it deserves to be heard by anyone willing to listen. If this look back at the golden age of the American Western moved you at all, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. There's a lot more history worth uncovering here. Stories from the classic era that rarely get told the way they should be. These films, and the people who made them, built something that's lasted far longer than anyone expected. The least we can do is make sure their names last just as long. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.